How's everyone doing? I see we're totally packed. I like that. I am going to talk about something that I'm very excited about, which is running Cline. So I joined Cline as head of operations, which is really just a catch-all saying that I just do whatever needs to be done. If there's a hat, no one's wearing it, I wear the hat. So let's get started here. So we're going to quickly talk through today about what it's like to be an agentic coding company and how that process of building a company in this space really works. Some of the lessons we've learned as a company that builds a lot of software, and we do it very quickly with AI. And then kind of my process for how I started thinking about putting Cline in the cloud, because one of the things that I really like about coding agents is they're autonomous, but they're not autonomous if they rely on my computer. So to kick us off, I'm going to tell the story of how we started. We were founded by this guy, Saud Rizwan, who's amazing. It was actually a hackathon project for Anthropic, which, of course, he lost, which is a big L on Anthropic's side. And Saud didn't stop. He kept going. He kept building. He didn't let that sway him. And by the time I found out about it, it was one of the most well-adopted open source coding agents in the space. So as you can see, we've got some really big names who are using Cline. They have forks of Cline, potentially. They may even have products that are built off of Cline in the case of Salesforce. And I think when I joined in January, there was about 300,000 installs. And now I don't even know, like we put this number in 3.5, but I bet it's like higher than that already. And so the way I think about Cline and found out about it is it's kind of the special ops agent. I started with Cursor like everyone else. And I was like, okay, can this write code for me? Can it do my job for me, basically? And unfortunately, not quite there yet. So when I discovered Cline, I was very excited because it was the first tool that it had all of the features I was expecting and hoping for. It could edit files. It could use my terminal. At the time, this was like revolutionary. And I was just a software engineer. So anything I could do to save time for myself would be a huge benefit for me, really. And I had this moment where I was building this application that queued messages and sent it to the other side. Don't worry about it. The point is it was really boring and it was server side. And what I ended up doing is I spent about $25 and Cline did what I thought was a 5-day project in an afternoon while I was playing mobile games. My boss was very happy when I told him that. But I was like, oh no, I just spent more than my Cursor subscription in a single setting. That's not good. And then the more I thought about it, I was like, well, this is actually pretty cool because I just did what I thought was 5 days worth of work and it only cost me $25. So that's really a good performance multiplier on what I'm trying to do. And so I got very excited about Cline. This like totally made me believe that this AI thing is here to stay. And yes, I've been using Claude quite a bit to try to do the same thing, but it didn't quite take my job in the way that Cline did. And so I knew I had to join. And so when I saw Saud tweeting that he was looking to hire people in San Francisco, I had to tweet at him. And that's essentially how this journey began. So when I joined Cline, it was pretty clear. It was just Saud and our marketing guy. It was really clear that what we needed to do was scale the team. We're competing against Cursor, which has billions of dollars in funding. And so the question kind of became, how do we scale this team? How do we grow it as fast as possible without collapsing? Because growing a company fast is just hard. And so it really forced us to think through what our values would be for hiring and how to think through using all of the features that we've developed. And so I've got some lessons that I want to impart here because I think these are some hard-earned lessons. First off, people who use AI as a tool for education are going to far exceed anyone who just tries to have it completely do their job. AI is a really powerful tool, but my biggest fear is that it's going to make us worse at doing reasoning ourselves. Because if I'm letting the AI make all the decisions, where am I in this picture? And I think we're pretty smart. We have usually a better intuition than the AI do. And so finding people that use it to learn is going to really save you a lot of time. Also, you really want to ask people what they've been doing with AI, because everyone's done something or has some story they can tell, but not everyone's actually building something that they're very excited about. And I think that's a really key feature. The other thing is you should always trust your gut. If you are unsure about a new person that's joining your team, chances are you're going to continue being unsure. And especially as a hiring manager, I think it's critical that you suss out these kinds of concerns early and like listen to them, because if you have to let someone go, that's always a painful process and no one really wants to do that. And then I really like the idea that you want to hire people that you'd be confident learning from. If you feel like they could teach you something, they could be your manager, and you'd be excited about that, usually means they're a really good hire. And so I think these are some of the things we've done to scale from, I think we were 2 people to 38 or something like that now. I think we even hired someone this week, which is pretty exciting. However, as the team got bigger, we started having new problems. We had all these new engineers. Not all of them were very advanced, we'll say, but they were all very smart and very passionate and very excited to be on the journey with us. And what that meant is we had very ambitious PRs that were very large and impossible to review. And this just puts a huge amount of pressure on your senior engineers, rather than having the juniors actually have to think through their problems and think critically. They're going, oh, this looks good, and making the senior engineer have to think through it. And that slows down the whole team. And so we had to come up with what is the proper way to vibe code. And of course, we use Cline to build Cline, so we can't like ban vibe coding, can we? But if your velocity is going down, you want to make sure that you have a good strategy here. So what we ended up doing is actually banning vibe coding. And what I mean by that is vibe coding is specifically when you are out there trying to completely let the agent take over and do the coding for you. And that's fun. And if you're doing a nice side project, or you're me and you're building a demo for a customer, then that's perfect. You can do that. But as soon as you get to a certain level of complexity, it all breaks down. And so the critical feedback that we had to give is if you don't understand your PRs, no one else can either. And so vibe coding in itself, where you don't understand the code that's being written, shouldn't be allowed. You have to be responsible for every line that's coming out. And then I would also recommend that you have small PRs. And so some of the ways that we enforce this is with rules for the agents. This is a whole new paradigm where you can write rules that the agents follow. And then even if your engineers kind of want to vibe code incorrectly, because they're using these rules, they'll have cleaner code. And that helps make sure the code is readable and helps you really think through the proper process. But also you can have it write tests. You can have it teach your engineers the right way to write tests. So one really large architectural change we made for Cline was we started using a message passing layer through gRPC. Now, the reason we did this is Cline started as this very integrated architecture where it was all one application. And we quickly realized what we needed was the agent, and then however we're presenting the agent to you, your presentation layer and the core agentic loop. And so this process of separating the two has been a huge journey for us. And this involved adding new technologies that no one knew how to use, and then enforcing that people actually used that. So early on, I had a conversation with one of our senior engineers about this new system that was using gRPC. And we were debating the best way to do it and how to teach people how to actually use these new message passing system. And the conversation, I recorded the whole conversation and transcribed it, and then I gave it to Cline. And I was like, Cline, here's the conversation where he explained to me how to actually do this and how to use these new technologies that, frankly, I'm not on the engineering team. I don't know how to use them at all. Write a nice rule and read the code to really understand how to take advantage of these new features. And it wrote a nice, pretty short file. This would be advice I would give. Make sure your rules are short and singular in purpose. That explained how to make a new message, how to receive the message, and a rough explanation of how to set up the system. And as a result, no one in the company has had to ask questions about this because Cline just knows how to do it. It sets it up, it gets you going, and it saves you a lot of time. And on top of that, you can really use the rules to ensure that however you're doing your coding best practices, that they're being followed correctly. So you can have PR review systems where you have rules for how big the PR is. And these can be a little bit more fuzzy because you're using an AI intelligence to really set the tone. So that gives you a lot of leeway to how to exactly change and control these systems. So the next thing that I started using a lot, because especially for me, I'm trying out a new PR. It's maybe from a community member. I don't really know. And we have a pretty large code base, actually. So figuring out what sections to read, I rely heavily on AI to review the code. Now, I have some advice on how to do that, actually. When you're using AI, you really need to make sure that it's doing the correct amount of research. One of the big problems is they always think they know the right answer. So if you can have the correct rules for how deep it should go, what level it should look for, that really helps with the review. And then what I find myself doing a lot is I have it create a document with all of the issues that it finds. And then for each one of those issues, this is my own internal process, I'll spin up a task that looks at that issue and figures out how to, like, is it a real issue? Is it correct? And that way you even get a second review on the previous review. And a lot of times that catches stuff because it's like, well, this was actually an opinion by the first review, and maybe it made the right decision, but maybe it didn't. And I think by taking advantage of these layers of reviews and by setting up rules, it's 100% going to make your team faster. And if people really have the sense of responsibility behind the code that they do, that really helps as well. So we do a lot of shaming people who don't understand the code they write, because I think that's a new problem in our industry. So as we got a little bit more deep into this, we started to really think through how to make good features. And something that came to us is frequently the people who are telling us their problems aren't the users who are using the AI the most. And so we've got this divide between people who are more advanced and just have the right strategies, everything I started talking about, and the people who have very loud opinions about how they think the agents should go. And so ultimately, there's really one source of truth in any kind of agentic product, and that's the model that actually runs the agent. And so focusing on making the models happy is really the key to having your agent run effectively. So I think a lot of people try to optimize costs too early, and that's the wrong problem. If you're trying to make everything fit into a really neat cost package, a subscription per se, then you're going to lose out on some of the most valuable outcomes. Because if I can't spend $100 on an issue, which sounds crazy, I might not get that extra solution. And so I think this is something that we hear pretty regularly from our larger customers. They're like, oh, the costs are so high. But ultimately, if that leads to worse results, you may end up spending more money in the long run. Also, agents are search machines. So in the past, we would have algorithms that would go and search for the information you're looking for. The models are better at that than we are typically. Our best algorithm will often give data that the model doesn't care about. And so letting the model make that decisions usually leads to better results. And that's definitely much better than a more algorithmic retrieval approach. So that's why we're pretty against using vectorized code-based searching, because it just doesn't work very well. And primarily, it's a cost savings measure. So let the agent do the context engineering for you. So one of the things that I would get asked a lot, especially earlier, is what are you doing to manage context? And the model does that. We don't touch that. We let the model do almost all of that work, and that leads to the best results. Sometimes that's costly, but I think it's worth it. Also, I would note that when I'm using Cline, a lot of times I'll have it write prompts for me. So I was talking about rules and workflows, and Cline is much better at writing those rules than I am. And that really comes down to the model. So if your team is mostly using Anthropic models, it might make sense to have Anthropic models write your prompts. Definitely there are some advantages to having model-specific prompts as well. So I think the more we dive into this, the more we're focused, almost like a research lab, on trying to test each of these model providers and develop solutions that just make it better for them. And this is almost entirely through having Cline prompt itself and change its own prompts, because that's what's going to make Cline the happiest. So some advice around actually using agents that kind of goes in line with this. the faster you can get feedback to the agent, the faster you're going to have a good result. So if the agent needs to spend a lot of time running your tests and or you have to test it manually yourself, that's going to make it take a really long time. But if I have a very easy test script that runs fast for a specific unit test, then the agent can just go back and forth making a modification and testing it until you've achieved the result you're looking for. So I think test-driven development is so back. I've never done it before because I've always been in startups until now, because now I just have Cline write the tests, and I'll spend almost more time thinking through the test cases than in a lot of times, and the plan for that, than actually writing the code. Usually Cline just does that, and I'm like, okay, we're good. Another thing, AI doesn't know what it doesn't know. I mentioned this before. So having it ask you questions is a hack. If you have the agent asking you questions, this is going to lead to a combination of your thoughts and the AI's thoughts. And that's going to make the plan that you're developing and the work that it's doing smarter. So I spend a lot of time writing questions or having it ask me questions whenever I'm planning. And my one kind of critique with the more autonomous agents that we're starting to see and putting these agents in the CLI and in the cloud is I'm out of the loop more. So I think the big advantage of having them in the cloud is after you've done the planning, when there aren't hopefully any questions that need to be answered. But I would definitely focus very hard on having it ask you questions. A lot of times I'll be like biased and I'll come in with an idea of how I want an architecture to work, but not necessarily going to be the best at architecture. But the model will sometimes be like, hey, actually, you should try this other architecture. And here are the pros and cons of multiple approaches. And I can ask questions about it. By having this dialogue, you're going to lead to better results. But ultimately, what this leads to is that we really need to make it easier for more iterations of these like runs to happen at once. And as a result of us doing all this prior architecture work, we were ready to start putting Cline in a way where we can script it and build it into other things. And that led us to build our CLI. So we are different than all the other CLIs in the way that we're not really targeting having a user interface in the CLI. It's not really designed to be used. You can use it, I do, but a lot of our competitors are trying to build user interfaces in the CLI, and that makes no sense. We've got very nice app infrastructure. That's where you should be doing your very nice app stuff. And the CLI should be about building the agent into other things. Like in our case, we're going to be using CLI for sub-agents, which is, I think, a very hot topic because it saves you on the context. And so once we have the CLI, we're like, okay, well, we need to actually build in some of these tools. We have some insane number of GitHub issues. We have PRs from people from all around the world on a constant basis. We need to review our code more effectively. So now that we have the CLI, we can actually use that to do all of these things, to audit our issues, to really make our own processes faster. And the problem there is I need to run this CLI somewhere. I don't want it on my computer. And so in thinking about this, I started thinking we should use Vercel Sandbox for this. It's very easy. It opens it up. And so I built this quick demo, which I could maybe jump into right now, on how to actually, how we went about doing that. So let's make it full screen. So here I've got a GitHub issue that someone submitted that I reopened. And so you can see I have like 600 issues. That's insane. That's a lot of issues. And so the way this is going to work is I'm going to add this label. And the label is there because if I don't have a manual human step in there, someone could prompt inject in the GitHub issue, and who knows what the agent could do. Something I realized pretty early on in testing this is in the CLI sandbox, Cline is totally able to read its own environmental variables. And so there's like a very real risk that Cline can actually go and try and break out of its nice sandbox environment. And I don't want to leak that. So here I'm going to connect to the Vercel sandbox, and we can see it's spun up for that particular GitHub issue. So now the process here is I wanted to make this modular. So we have a system that builds the prompts up from little components. So I have a prompt that explains what a GitHub issue is and the information from the GitHub issue. I have a prompt about using the GH CLI so that it is capable of actually setting and handling this issue. And then I have a nice system for like how I want it to actually go through the process of reviewing and triaging this issue. So the first step of that is deep research, which is what it's doing now. So Cline is going through the code base and trying to actually determine root cause for this problem. And ironically, after I did this, I was like, oh, it did such a good job. And one of our engineers pointed out that it missed a whole section of the code base. So in a future iteration, I would come back and give it more information or write some rules to make sure that it understands, in this case, the settings more clearly in how to set that up. And so each step of the way, you can see Cline is thinking a little bit, and I do have it sped up a little because the models aren't fast quite yet. But in the cloud, it doesn't need to be super fast because it's running in the background, and I can spin off one of these for all 600 of our issues, and that would save me a huge amount of time because ultimately triaging these issues, no one on our team really has time to do that. We have to kind of fit it into our schedule because there's so many other things going on. And so I think if we can use the tools we have available to really automate that process, that's going to save us a lot of time. And ultimately, having this in a cloud setting really makes it easy for us. So here we're getting near the end. It's actually using a scoring criteria to triage this issue. Now, prompt trick of the week, if you create a scorecard for the model to score your solution, that's going to create the best outcome. And so here you can see it responded. It's got the full issue, its explanation, its ideal way of fixing it and how it could fix it. And potentially a human could review this and be like, go ahead. And Cline could open up a PR and get this going already. Make this not as big. There we go. Love that. So, whatever. Here's what's big about Cline, though. So we're open source. I think that a lot of people are open source, so kind of who cares about that. But I think the big benefit of us being open source is that we're very secure. You can audit every line of code. You know where your inference is going. You know where all the data is going. And that's something that's very attractive to really large enterprises. They don't need to trust us. All of our code is out there, and they don't need to pay us as their inference provider for AI usage. They can use their own. So a really popular thing that a lot of our customers use is Bedrock from AWS. And that means that all of their inference stays inside of their network. So it never actually leaves. It never comes to us. And in that way, you can verify that it's actually totally secure. And so we talk to a lot of companies who want air-gapped setups and who want to use local models. And we talk to a lot of really large companies, which is kind of harsh for us because we're not ready for those companies yet, but they're ready for us. The second thing, we've always been pushing the needle on what's cutting edge. We had plan mode back in January. And that was one of the features that I was very excited to help be a part of because that's my process. I always make a really detailed plan and then I go and execute on it. And I think that, similarly with MCP, we were very early on MCP and I was a huge supporter of MCP. Fortunately, CLI tools, usually better. And then I think the last thing is because we're not making money on inference, because our business model isn't inference, you know that all of the dollars that you're spending on inference isn't going to us, it's going towards the work that you're doing. And I think that that's also something that really helps us out. Because ultimately, you want to make sure that you're spending the most, that you're getting the most for your dollar. And so, yeah, I mean, I think this is like where we really come in because we've got the system that both protects your privacy as best as possible and takes advantage of all of the features of the model lab. Ideally, we want to be as close to the model as possible. And I think that that's something that's very helpful for us. So I think in the future, I'm really hoping to see these agents become more swarms of agents. I think this is like a hot thing for me now that I've been trying it with the Sandbox. Why have one solution to a problem when I can spin up 3 or 4 versions of Cline? And we've seen Codex try to do this. One of the things that I'm hoping to work on a little bit more is some of these security tools, because everything that the model sees becomes a risk. So I mentioned prompt injection earlier. this is a very large issue when you're talking about real production code bases. If I have an MCP server that gives access to the internet, for example, my favorite is Firecrawl. I use it all the time to read people's docs. I used it to read the Vercel Sandbox docs, actually. And that's great, but for all I know, if I'm reading the wrong page, the wrong web page, all of a sudden my client might be trying to leak information or write code that I don't understand, which goes back to why you should be vibe coding responsibly. And so I think as we scale Cline, we're really hoping to focus on some of these security features by trying to prevent these types of attacks and to really focus in on making the agent safe for use at work, because I think that's kind of something that separates us from our competition. But that's all I have for today. I think maybe I can answer questions. I love it. Does anyone have any questions? We'll call it then. Thank you, everyone. Oh, well, I can still answer your question.
Customers are ready for you guys before you were actually ready for customers.
Always.
How'd you go about that process in a very, governance and security wary environment?
Yeah, I think this has been easily the biggest challenge. The way this started is I decided, maybe incorrectly, that we're going to put a Zoom link on our website so people could contact me personally. And I was very surprised when the first person I talked to was a principal engineer at Brex, and I thought it was someone going to sell me something. No, he was interested in buying Cline, and so this really tipped me off to the fact that this is coming. And yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily have a good answer for you there. I think we're still figuring it out. The advantage of being open source, though, is there's always been an option that is very high security because you don't have to trust us at all. And so I think as we grow, we're really hoping to put in more configuration features and things like SSO, which none of my engineers want to work on, but are very important for us to make sure that it stays secure. And I would definitely expect us to have more of those coming soon as well.